There's a country that owns more foreign debt than the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund combined. It's not the United States. It's not Japan. It's China. And most of the world didn't notice it happening until the bills started coming due. In 2000, China was lending almost nothing to the rest of the world. By 2017, it had quietly become the planet's largest official creditor. Then something strange happened. Countries started defaulting. And China's response has been unlike anything we've seen from a major lender in modern history. This is the story of the largest hidden debt machine ever built. Let's start with a number that doesn't make sense. Between 2000 and 2017, China lent roughly $1 trillion to developing countries. That's more money than the entire Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II, adjusted for inflation. Except this time, there was no war, no grand geopolitical alliance, just ports, highways, power plants, and a whole lot of debt. Most of these loans never showed up in official statistics. The World Bank didn't count them. The IMF didn't track them. For years, economists had no idea how much money China was actually moving around the developing world. They were flying blind. Here's why that matters right now. Sri Lanka collapsed in 2022. Pakistan is teetering. Zambia defaulted. Ecuador, Kenya, Ethiopia, all drowning in debt they can't repay. And when you look at who they owe, the same name keeps appearing. Not a bank, not a hedge fund, China. But here's where it gets interesting. China isn't acting like a typical creditor. It's not seizing assets. It's not sending in the IMF. It's doing something else entirely, something quieter, something harder to see. Let me show you how the machine actually works. It starts with the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013. Beijing's pitch was simple. We'll build the infrastructure you need, and you can pay us back later. Airports in Pakistan, railways in Kenya, ports in Sri Lanka. On paper, it looked like development aid. In practice, it was vendor financing on a civilizational scale. Here's the key part most people miss. These weren't loans from the Chinese government to foreign governments. They were loans from Chinese state-owned banks to foreign governments, often secured by future revenue from the very projects being built. The China Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank of China became the world's largest infrastructure lenders without most people realizing these institutions even existed. And the terms were creative. Interest rates averaged around 4%, higher than the World Bank, but lower than commercial lenders. Maturities stretched to 20 or 30 years, but buried in the contracts were clauses that traditional lenders don't usually include. Confidentiality agreements that prevented borrowers from disclosing terms, cross-default provisions that triggered payment if the borrower defaulted to anyone else, and collateral requirements that tied repayment to physical assets or commodity exports. Let me give you a concrete example. In 2007, the China Development Bank lent the Democratic Republic of Congo $6 billion for infrastructure. The collateral wasn't a building or a port. It was copper and cobalt mining rights. If Congo couldn't pay, China got access to natural resources. This wasn't a loan in the traditional sense. It was a resources for infrastructure swap with a credit line attached. Sri Lanka borrowed heavily to build the Hambantota port. When Sri Lanka couldn't make payments, it didn't result in a messy default. Instead, Sri Lanka signed over a 99-year lease of the port to a Chinese state-owned company in 2017. Debt didn't disappear. It converted into equity. This is the model. Build infrastructure with Chinese contractors using Chinese materials financed by Chinese banks. Then take physical or economic control when payments stop. And payments are stopping. By 2020, something had shifted. More than 60% of China's overseas loans were going to countries in financial distress. That's not a development strategy. That's a bailout operation. China started lending new money just so countries could pay back old money. The debt trap everyone warned about wasn't a trap Beijing set intentionally. It was a math problem that compounded faster than anyone expected. Here's the uncomfortable reality. China is now conducting more developing country bailouts than the IMF. Let that sink in. The institution created specifically to handle sovereign debt crises has been outloaned and outrescued by a single country. Between 2019 and 2021, China provided emergency loans and refinancing worth roughly $240 billion. Most of it hasn't been publicly reported, and the terms of these rescues are bizarre. China isn't demanding austerity or structural reforms the way the IMF does. It's extending maturities, rolling over loans, and occasionally just pausing payments. On the surface, that sounds generous, but look closer. By keeping countries technically solvent, China avoids triggering defaults that would expose just how much money is at risk. If Ecuador defaults officially, China has to write down the loss. If Ecuador gets another loan that delays the default by 3 years, the problem moves off this quarter's balance sheet. This is extend and pretend on a geopolitical scale. But here's the really strange part. China is now owed money by countries that are also in debt to Western institutions. And when those countries need debt relief, China refuses to coordinate with other creditors. It negotiates separately, in private, often demanding that its loans get repaid first. The technical term for this is preferred creditor status. China wants the benefits of being the IMF without the transparency or accountability. Let me contrast this with the story we were told. When the Belt and Road Initiative launched, the narrative was win-win development. China helps poor countries build infrastructure they desperately need, and in return, China gets trading partners and diplomatic allies. It sounded almost philanthropic, a new model of South-South cooperation that didn't come with the colonial baggage of Western aid. The reality is more complicated. Most of the big Belt and Road projects hired Chinese construction firms, used Chinese materials, and employed Chinese workers. The money never really left China's economy. It was a stimulus package for Chinese industry disguised as foreign aid. The infrastructure got built, yes, but the economic benefits stayed in Beijing, while the debt obligations stayed in Islamabad, Nairobi, and Colombo. And now we're seeing the second act. China isn't a vengeful creditor. It's not repoing countries or demanding fire sales. But it's not forgiving debt either. It's converting it. Loans become leases. Debt becomes dependency. Countries that can't pay find themselves signing new agreements that give China access to resources, markets, or strategic locations for decades. This isn't colonialism in the 19th century sense. There are no flags or governors, but it's a form of economic control that's proving just as durable. Zoom out for a second and look at what this means. China has built a parallel financial system that operates outside the rules and institutions that governed global lending for the last 75 years. The World Bank has transparency requirements. The IMF has conditionality frameworks. The Paris Club coordinates debt relief among creditors. China ignores all of it. And because China holds so much debt, it can hold up restructuring deals. When Zambia needed debt relief, negotiations dragged on for years because China wouldn't agree to the same terms as other creditors. Meanwhile, Zambia's economy kept shrinking. The people suffered, but the debt stayed on the books. Here's the scary part. We still don't know the full scale of the exposure. Researchers at institutions like Harvard and the World Bank have tried to piece together the numbers by going country by country, contract by contract. Their best estimate is that China is owed somewhere between $1 and $1.5 trillion by developing countries, with huge uncertainty around the exact figure. Hidden debt, undisclosed terms, and opaque restructuring deals make it nearly impossible to assess the true risk. And that risk isn't just theoretical. If a significant number of borrowers default simultaneously, China's state banks could face losses that would normally trigger a financial crisis. Except these aren't normal banks. They don't answer to shareholders or regulators in the traditional sense. They answer to Beijing. So what happens when the debt can't be repaid and can't be refinanced and can't be restructured? Nobody really knows. We're in uncharted territory. The largest creditor in human history is a non-democratic state with no transparency requirements and no institutional checks. It's rewriting the rules of sovereign debt in real time, and the rest of the world is still trying to figure out what the new rules even are. Some countries will keep paying. Some will default quietly. Some will hand over ports and mines and power grids in deals that won't be made public for years. China set out to build roads and bridges. It ended up building leverage, and the bill is just starting to come due.